So if we were going to give the United States of America a report card at age 250, what might it look like? This is Dr. Gary Kelner, and I would like to welcome you to Fair Game. America is turning 250 years old. When you live in this country, it's very easy to lose sight of what an incredible accomplishment it is for this country to celebrate a 250th birthday. Alone among the nations of the world, America was founded on an idea. Then that magnificent sentence in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Most nations are found on the idea of race, ethnicity, religion. Only this one. So I think it's fair on the 250th birthday to do a report card. Now, all of us have had to deal with report cards. I can remember my first one when I was in the first grade at Essex Elementary School. And my first grade teacher was a crusty old nun named Mary Sanker. The very name causes my blood to run cold all these decades later. But I handed the report card to my father, and under behavior, I said, "Dad, what does IMPUDENT mean?" He said, "You mean impudent?" I said, "Yes, sir, impudent." He said, "Impudent means you don't watch television for 2 weeks." So most of us have had some pretty unpleasant experiences with report cards. There is that small percentage of compliant children who do what they are asked to do in the way they are asked to do it, and they receive very good grades in school. And then there's everybody else. Now, the report cards of my childhood had several categories. It wasn't A, B, C, D, E. It was excellent, very good, average, needs improvement, and unsatisfactory. So if we were going to give the United States of America a report card at age 250, what might it look like? Well, I think the first thing that you want to do is to compare our performance against our founding ideals. The fundamental ideal of this republic is the idea of liberty. That God has endowed every human being with certain qualities and certain potentialities that don't come from government, they don't come from society, they come to us from God. And that each person should have the opportunity to go as far with their potential as they possibly can. How have we done with that one? Well, for the first couple of 100 years, we did really well, because if there weren't many opportunities for you in Boston or Philadelphia or Baltimore or on a farm in the South, you could always move west. You could always move to new land on the frontier. if you didn't mind a million ways to get killed on the frontier. But the wide open spaces created all kinds of opportunity for people and gave rise to innovation, whether it was in farming or in home construction, education, business, transportation. In our first couple of centuries, the frontier defined us in a great way because it forced innovation. You just did not have the connection to the markets back east. Folks had to fend for themselves. Well, it has been said that the frontier closed about 1890, and at that point we start to become a different people. In a modern industrial society does not lend itself to quite as many options as we had in colonial America or in the westward expansion. Folks end up being defined by their job. The opportunities are kind of vertical. You come in as a day worker, you come in as an hourly worker, and slowly you work yourself up the ladder to some position of responsibility. There's not a lot of openness in that. And by the early 20th century, there were any number of writers who felt that something critical had been lost to us. Now, I think it can be said that in the post-World War II world, we started to gain some of that back. The GI Bill enabled millions of returning soldiers and sailors and Marines to pursue higher education. The Veterans Bill allowed the returning vets to buy homes and get their foot on the first rung of the middle class. And within an astonishingly short period of time, about 25 years, America had the highest rates of home ownership in the history of the planet. And my family, that came over here in the 1840s and 50s, had never been very successful. My great-grandfather lost a leg in the Civil War. He did get $2.50 a month from the federal government for his disability payment. He used to jokingly say that he should have lost both legs and he would have gotten $5 a month. But most of our family really hand to mouth for 2 or 3 generations. But that generation that went off to World War II came home and found that if they wanted to go to college, they could. If they wanted to own a home, they could. So the highest levels of home ownership, prosperity in the history of the world were created in the United States between 1946, when the boys came home, and 1980, when we elected Ronald Reagan president. I would say that the advent of the computer age, of the microchip, of the internet, created another avalanche of opportunity. And so, if you're doing a report card on America, you would have to say that on the promise of opportunity, we have done better than any society in the last 10,000 years. Now, it hasn't been opportunity for everybody. In the colonial era, hundreds of thousands of Americans were enslaved people, enslaved by virtue of their color, enslaved by virtue of their birth, and there wasn't much opportunity for them. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and things began to open up. And amazingly, in 2008, America elects its first black president. 2020 elects a female vice president who also happens to be black and Asian. Again, if you look at where we start and you look at the progress we've made, it is pretty impressive. Now, it's not impressive if you were one of the ones who was cut out of the deal. It was not very impressive if you were locked in an urban ghetto. But if you compare America to the rest of the world, we did pretty well. And here's a measure of it. I have spent decades of my life traveling and working outside the United States. And it doesn't matter where I go. I can go to Ukraine, the Philippines, East Africa, South America, Mexico, Central America. People want to come here. People aren't standing in line to go to Russia. They don't stand in line to go to China or Germany or France or Japan. Why? Because the people of the world understand that the promise of liberty and opportunity is not just a marketing scheme. It is a reality here. And I think any report card that we give this country has to start with that part. Now, how did we do with people of color in this country? Well, from 1619, I think you could say it was a pretty bad record. This was not a great place to be if you were a Native American, where the head of the United States Army, William Tecumseh Sherman, once said, "The only good Indian is a dead Indian." And he had Phil Sheridan to help implement that policy in the West. It wasn't a good place for people who were subjected to all the horrors of slavery. And yet, 1863, Abraham Lincoln, as a war measure, issues the Emancipation Proclamation declaring that slaves who are in areas in active rebellion against the Union are henceforth and forever free. Frederick Douglass, the great black abolitionist, criticized Lincoln, and he said it didn't really count for much. Maybe. Except it counted for something. And 2 years later, we got the 13th Amendment that declared that slavery was abolished forever. And 1 year later, we get the 14th Amendment that says that anyone born in the United States of America is a United States citizen no matter where their parents were born. I've had some debate about that one here recently, but the Supreme Court in a narrow decision determined, 5-4, that the words of the amendment applied to everybody. That is an advance. Because if you're not German, you don't get to be a German. The Turkish workers in Germany, they don't get to be German. The Africans who go to Germany don't get to be German. And the same is pretty much true in France, and you get my point. 15th Amendment, we determined that every citizen had a right to vote. So what fascinates me about this country on its 250th birthday is we started out in some bad places, and there are still all kinds of areas of problem, and yet we have a capacity for self-reflection and self-criticism in America that you don't find in a lot of other places. In fact, in a lot of other places, it gets you imprisoned or executed. So, on the idea of opportunity, you have to give us a B+ or an A-. On the idea of progress toward our ideals, well, we're somewhere in the B range. We still have a lot of work to do, but we have done a great deal of work. Now, one of the things that the left carries on about today is income inequality, as if that's a new problem. There has been income inequality ever since there was income. People have different talents, they have different interests, they have different opportunities, and because of that, they don't all make the same amount of money. Now, the folks who talk the most about income inequality are convinced that if somebody makes a lot of money, they must have stolen it. They must have gotten it by some nefarious means. The founders never envisioned equality, meaning egalitarianism, that everything would look the same, be the same, that everybody's paid the same. What they meant is that everybody would have equal opportunity. That said, you do have to raise some questions. When Warren Buffett's secretary, as one of the richest men in the world, pays more taxes every year than he does. When the top 1% pay considerably less taxes than the people who work for them. And that's one reason why we need government. It's been popular the last 40 years or more to inveigh against government. And I think there are some folks on the conservative side who would probably get rid of sidewalks and public education because they just don't want to pay any taxes. Well, Pericles said nearly 2,500 years ago, the taxes are the price you pay to have civilization. So, how are we doing when it comes to income inequality? This is where I remember a story that Jesus told about 3 people who were given sums of money by the boss. And they were considerable sums of money, 5 to 10 times the average man's wage. One man was given 1 talent, which was a weight of gold. The second was given 2, and the third was given 5. The one who was given 5 doubled his money and made 10. And the owner came back and he said, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy I prepared for you." The second one took the 2 and turned it into 5. The last guy, he said, "I know you're a hard man. You reap where you didn't sow," which means the boss is a crook. So because I know you're a crook, I took the money, I buried it in a hole. Unsurprisingly, he didn't make anything. And the punchline of the story, because all these stories of Jesus have punchlines, the punchline of that story, Jesus said, "To he who has and uses well what he has, more will be given, and that with abundance." Which is to say that if you're smart and you're resourceful and you use what comes through your hands well, you are going to prosper. There's a lot of human history to support that viewpoint. Now, all you have to do to see what happens when people have a lot of money come through their hands is to watch lottery winners and to see whether they win $10 million, $20 million, $100 million, how many of them are broke in 5 years. Because they didn't have the sense God gave a duck. They didn't use the resources wisely. So when you talk about income inequality as one of the boxes to check, well, you might look at that one a little bit differently. Is it really the objective that everybody make the same thing? Well, since no socialist economy has ever worked anywhere in the world, I would say no. Some people are going to do well and some people aren't going to do as well. There is an equality in nature where we are all God's creatures, where we are all endowed with certain abilities. But then there is also an inequality in talent. And talent always rises. Brings us back to opportunity, doesn't it? So we aren't going to grade that one because I'm not sure that that one is valid at all. How are we doing on justice? You have to understand what justice is. Justice means that everybody gets their due. Justice means an equal standing before the law. How does that work in America? Well, that is a complex subject. Some wag decades ago said America is the only country in the world where you could get 5 to 10 for stealing a loaf of bread and get elected president if you steal billions. There is inequality under the law. If you have enough money, generally speaking, you could probably beat the rap. Getting your due. I look at states like Louisiana that to this day operate under the Napoleonic Code, which essentially assumes that you are guilty until proved innocent. And where sentences for fairly minor crimes are draconian. There are a lot of people doing hard time for long periods of time who really didn't do very much. Texas is another place where that happens. Our report card on justice is uneven. And we do know that throughout our history, it has mattered what color your skin was. That the number of African Americans incarcerated in comparison to the number of Anglo-Americans is dramatically different. There are judges who are wonderful people and try hard to do the right thing in their courts. But any friend I've ever had who was a judge had a certain amount of frustration because of insane ideas like mandatory sentencing. I don't know how you get justice with mandatory sentencing because it takes the human element out of adjudication. The ideas of 3 strikes, you're out. 3 felonies and you're in for life. Really? Seriously? That's a solution? So, I think we can look at issues of how the law is applied. I think we can take a look at sentencing guidelines. I think we can look at the way sentences are weighted and raise legitimate questions about where we are as a society. If I had to give a grade on that one just seems like a C- to me. Now, I don't think there's much temperament either at the state or federal levels to do much about it because there's so much political action committee money being pumped into the system right now that the main concern of any elected is getting reelected. And they aren't going to take on the PACs. And they aren't going to take on the billionaires. So from opportunity standpoint, probably the billionaires are going to have a little more opportunity than everybody else because they have a whole lot more money than everybody else. And I think when it comes to sentencing, probably they're going to do a little bit better on that because they can afford the lobbyists to affect the sentencing guidelines. Which brings me to the performance of the people who are elected to serve us. American history is full of men and women who were deeply committed to the ideals of the Republic and to serving their fellow citizens. Somebody asked Harry Truman once what he thought the main job of the president was. And the little man from Independence, in his snappy way, said, "I'm here to be a lobbyist for 175 million people who can't afford one." I can't think of a better way to describe what elected people are there to do. I have been in elected office, and I thought about Harry Truman almost every day of my years of service. That my job was to be a lobbyist for the folks who couldn't afford one. The folks who could afford them didn't need me. They needed me to try to be fair. They needed me to listen. They needed me to take their time and their concerns as seriously as I would someone who didn't have their advantages in life. But I think that if you go all the way back to the founders, a high percentage of the people who have served us were motivated to serve for high ideals. Not all of them were. And we've had venial politicians in every generation. We had one in the first generation named Aaron Burr, who unfortunately made it as high as vice president. He is the first and only vice president to kill another man in office, though Cheney almost accomplished that when he was out quail hunting. But Aaron Burr had a duel with Alexander Hamilton and shot him dead. Burr was a contemptible human being. Aaron Burr would only tell the truth if a lie wouldn't do. He never saw a bribe he wouldn't take. But here's the positive in the story. There aren't many Aaron Burrs in American history. There are a lot more George Washingtons and Benjamin Franklins and John Adams. And when I think about giving us a grade on our 250th birthday, when it comes to leaders who fulfilled the ideal of service above self, of duty and honor and country, we have been served well. Probably can't give us an A on it, but probably a pretty good B. A lot more can be said about this republic, and I have absolutely no illusions that this little exercise says it all, or even says part. But if at least on this 250th birthday we can think about who we are and how we're doing, maybe it'll help us do a little better. This is Dr. Gary Kelner, and this is Fair Game. Thank you for joining us.